Billionaire CEO marries a waitress in a fake contract, but her honesty changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain fell hard against the glass walls of the high-rise cafe in downtown Chicago. It was late evening, the kind of night when most people hurried home. But Mia Torres lingered at a corner table. Her apron still smelled faintly of grease and coffee from the diner where she worked double shifts. Her hands were calloused, her nails chipped, but her eyes were steady. She was waiting for someone. The door opened with a sharp chime, and in walked Ethan Gray. Tall, tailored suit, a face carved with sharp confidence. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He sat opposite Mia, placed a sleek leather folder on the table, and slid it toward her. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a man used to being obeyed. "Marry me," he said flatly. "Think of it as a contract." Mia froze, her breath catching. For a moment she thought it was a cruel joke. Then she saw the document inside the folder, thick with signatures and clauses. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Excuse me? You cannot be serious." Ethan leaned back, unshaken by her disbelief. The rain streaked behind him like steel bars, framing him as both powerful and trapped. "I am entirely serious. 6 months. You pose as my wife. I clear your mother's hospital debt and guarantee your brother's tuition. At the end, we part ways. Clean, simple." Mia's throat tightened. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity, to walk away. But her mother's unpaid bills flashed in her mind. Her younger brother's textbooks, the landlord's threats, the weight of survival pressing down harder than the storm outside. Her lips trembled. "Why me?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." Ethan's gray eyes locked onto hers. "Because you are honest. You are ordinary. The board will believe you, and I need someone who has nothing to gain but survival. That makes you trustworthy." "Oh." Her hands clenched around the edge of the folder. The legal terms blurred before her eyes, but the numbers were clear, the debts erased, the security her family had begged for. It was everything she needed and everything she feared. "You want me to sell myself," Mia said softly, almost to herself. "I am giving you a choice," Ethan replied coldly. "Sign and your family walks free. Refuse, and I will find someone else." Out. The cafe seemed too quiet, the storm outside louder than her own heartbeat. Mia closed her eyes for a long second. When she opened them again, she picked up the pen, her hand trembling. The ink bled across the page as she signed her name. Ethan nodded once, collected the folder, and stood. His expression never changed, but a shadow of relief flickered in his eyes. He extended his hand. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Gray." Mia shook it, her pulse racing, knowing she had just stepped into a world where nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, Mia stood in the narrow kitchen of her small apartment, staring at the thin envelope of unpaid bills spread across the counter. The rain from last night had not stopped, and the leaky window let in a draft that made her shiver. Her mother coughed weakly from the bedroom, a sound that sliced through Mia like broken glass. She wanted to bring her tea, to comfort her, but she had already given her the last tea bag. The shelves were bare. There was nothing left but a few slices of bread that had gone stale. Her younger brother, Lucas, stumbled in with a backpack nearly as big as his thin shoulders. He tried to smile, but his eyes looked tired. "I need $40 for the lab fee," he said quietly, almost ashamed to ask. Mia swallowed hard, her throat dry. She opened her wallet. Inside was nothing but a few crumpled receipts and a bus pass. The memory of the contract she had signed the night before burned in her mind. Ethan Gray had promised to pay everything, the hospital debt, the tuition, the overdue rent. It was supposed to be the solution to all of this. But the price was a marriage that was not real, a cage built out of signatures and appearances. She pressed a hand against the counter to steady herself. "Do not worry, Lucas," she said softly, forcing her lips into a smile. "I will figure it out." When he left for school, Mia collapsed onto a chair, her head in her hands. For years, she had carried the weight of this family. Since her father died in a factory accident, she had worked every spare hour at the diner, cleaning tables, carrying trays, smiling for tips that barely covered groceries. Every night she fell asleep with her shoes still on, too exhausted to take them off. She dreamed once of painting. There was an old sketchbook hidden beneath her bed, filled with drawings of city streets and people on buses, all captured in charcoal lines. But those pages had turned yellow with neglect. Survival had pushed dreams aside. Now she was Mrs. Gray. The title echoed in her mind like a bell that would not stop ringing. Ethan had told her to pack a small bag. A car would arrive in 2 days to bring her to his penthouse. He had said it like a command, not an invitation. Mia lifted her head and looked around the apartment. The peeling paint, the single bulb buzzing above her, the damp carpet near the radiator. It was not much, but it was home. The thought of leaving her mother here, even for a short time, filled her with guilt. But Ethan had assured her that the medical bills would be handled immediately. Her mother would receive the care she needed. Lucas would not be thrown out of school. She tried to convince herself that it was just 6 months. 6 months of pretending. 6 months of enduring Ethan's cold gaze and the charade of being his wife. Then freedom. Then maybe she could breathe again. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from the landlord. Rent overdue. Final notice. Her heart sank. She typed back quickly. Please give me a little more time. There was no reply. Mia stood, walked into her mother's room, and gently pulled the blanket up to her chin. Her mother stirred, whispering, "You are working too hard, sweetheart." Mia kissed her forehead, holding back tears. "I am fine, Mama. Everything is going to be fine," she whispered. But as she returned to the kitchen and stared at the contract folder Ethan had left with her copy inside, she knew nothing about this arrangement was fine. It was survival, and survival demanded sacrifice. Outside, the rain beat harder against the window, as if the city itself knew she was about to step into a storm much larger than anything she had ever faced. 2 days later, the black sedan arrived exactly at 7 in the evening. Its polished surface reflected the flickering streetlight outside Mia's apartment. She stood on the sidewalk with a small suitcase by her feet, her hands trembling inside worn gloves. Her mother and Lucas had hugged her tightly before she left, unaware of the real reason behind her sudden departure. She told them she had been offered a temporary job, one that would take care of everything. It was not entirely a lie, but the truth was far heavier than she could explain. The driver, a man in his 50s with a stone face, opened the door without a word. Mia slid into the back seat, clutching her sketchbook against her chest. The city blurred past the windows as they drove toward the north side, where glass towers pierced the sky like monuments to power. The car finally stopped in front of a building that looked more like a palace than a residence. Gray Tower. The name glowed above the entrance in silver letters. Ethan was waiting in the lobby, dressed in a charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. He glanced at her suitcase, then at her hands, clutching the sketchbook. For a fleeting second his eyes softened, but the moment vanished. He gestured toward the elevator. "Come. There are things we must discuss before tomorrow." The ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft hum of the elevator. When the doors opened, Mia stepped into a penthouse unlike anything she had ever imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city glittering below. Chandeliers dripped crystals like falling stars, and every surface gleamed as though untouched by time. It was beautiful, but it felt cold, sterile, like a museum where nothing was meant to be touched. Ethan led her into a sleek study where a stack of papers lay on the desk. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, then fixed his gaze on her. "These are the conditions of our arrangement. 5 rules. Break them, and the contract ends immediately." Mia's stomach tightened. She stepped closer, scanning the crisp lines of text. Ethan's voice was steady, almost mechanical, as he listed them. First, no genuine romance. This is business only. Second, you will attend 5 public events by my side. Third, you will not interfere with my personal affairs. Fourth, you will maintain discretion at all times. And fifth, his eyes narrowed slightly, when the 6 months are over, you will walk away without expectation. Mia swallowed hard. Each rule felt like a wall being built around her. She forced herself to nod, though her chest ached. I understand. Ethan slid a pen across the desk. Sign here. Her hands shook as she picked up the pen. She had already signed once at the cafe, but this felt heavier, as if the walls of his world were closing around her. The ink glistened under the chandelier as she wrote her name. When it was done, Ethan placed the papers into a drawer and locked it. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. Tomorrow evening we attend a charity gala. It will be your first test. My assistant will prepare your dress and guide you through the basics. Do not embarrass me. Mia bristled at the coldness in his tone, but she bit back her reply. She was here for survival, not pride. She clutched her sketchbook tighter, grounding herself in the only piece of her old life she had left. Ethan noticed the book in her arms. What is that? Just drawings, she said softly. He studied her for a moment, as though he wanted to ask more, but instead he turned away, dismissing the subject. Get some rest. The guest room is down the hall. From now on, appearances are everything. Mia nodded and walked down the long hallway. The guest room was spacious, with velvet curtains and a bed so soft it seemed to swallow her whole. Yet she felt like a stranger trespassing in someone else's dream. She opened her sketchbook and traced the faded lines of an unfinished drawing. Her heart whispered that she had stepped into a cage, golden but unyielding. 6 months, she reminded herself. Just 6 months. But as the city lights flickered outside her window, she could not shake the fear that the price of this bargain would be far more than she had ever expected. The following morning, Mia awoke to the unfamiliar silence of the penthouse. No clatter of dishes, no hum of her mother's old radio, no distant shouts from neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls. Instead, sunlight spilled across marble floors, and the faint scent of polished wood hung in the air. For a moment she felt weightless, until the memory of the signed contract pulled her back down like an anchor. A knock echoed at her door. When she opened it, a woman in her 30s stood crisply dressed in black. "I am Claire," she introduced, her tone clipped but not unkind. "Mr. Gray's assistant. I am here to prepare you for tonight's gala." Before Mia could respond, Claire swept into the room with garment bags and boxes. She laid out a silk evening gown, heels that sparkled with crystals, and a velvet case that opened to reveal diamond earrings. Mia's eyes widened. She had never worn anything more expensive than a second-hand prom dress from the thrift store. Claire studied her closely. "You walk too quickly." Slow, measured steps. Shoulders back, and when reporters ask questions, you smile politely and say as little as possible. She guided Mia through etiquette, like a teacher drilling a student. How to hold a champagne flute, how to shake hands without gripping too hard, how to hide nerves behind a calm smile. Mia stumbled more than once, her voice catching, her posture stiff. Claire sighed but adjusted her with patience. "Remember, perception is reality. They will be watching you." By the afternoon, Mia's head spun from instructions, but the moment she slipped into the gown, everything shifted. The fabric clung perfectly, shimmering as though it belonged to another world. When she caught her reflection in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. For a fleeting second, she looked like she belonged beside a billionaire CEO. Ethan appeared at the doorway, his sharp gaze traveling from her hair to the hem of the gown. He said nothing at first, but the corner of his mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. "Acceptable," he murmured finally. Heat rose in Mia's cheeks. She wanted to retort, but Claire cleared her throat. "The car will be ready at 7. "Oh?" That evening, the black sedan carried them to the gala, a grand hotel glowing with chandeliers and laughter that spilled into the night. As they stepped onto the carpet, camera flashes exploded like lightning. The crowd murmured at the sight of Ethan Gray with a new wife. Mia's pulse raced, but she forced herself to smile, repeating Claire's instructions in her mind. Inside, the ballroom glittered with gowns and tuxedos. A string quartet played softly, while waiters weaved through the crowd with silver trays. Ethan placed his hand lightly on the small of her back, guiding her with effortless confidence. "You will stay close," he whispered without looking at her. "Do not wander, do not falter." Mia nodded, clutching her champagne glass. For a while, the introductions passed smoothly. She smiled, she nodded, she endured the scrutinizing stares. But then a man with slicked hair and a smug grin approached. "Ethan," he said loudly, shaking his hand. His eyes slid toward Mia, lingering with a mocking gleam. "And who is this?" "Quite a leap from your usual company." Mia's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan's arm slipped protectively around her waist. His voice cut sharp. "This is my wife, Mia, and she deserves far more respect than you are showing." The man blinked, stunned into silence. The surrounding guests turned their heads, whispers rippling through the air. Ethan guided Mia away, his grip steady, his jaw set. Mia glanced at him, her heart pounding. For the first time since signing the contract, she saw a flicker of something human beneath his cold exterior. Not just duty, not just calculation. For one moment, Ethan Gray had chosen to defend her, not for appearances, but because he meant it. As the evening wound down, she found herself standing on the balcony, the city glittering far below. The cold air cooled her flushed cheeks. Ethan joined her, silent at first, then spoke low. "You did well tonight." Mia turned to him, uncertain. "Even when I almost tripped on the carpet?" The corner of his lips curved faintly. "Especially then. You recovered with grace." She laughed softly, surprising herself. For the first time, the walls between them seemed less unbreakable. And as the city lights shimmered in the distance, Mia realized that the line between contract and something far deeper had begun to blur. The night after the gala, Mia lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The applause, the whispers, and the sting of the businessman's insult still echoed in her ears. But louder than all of it was the memory of Ethan's arm around her waist, the certainty in his voice when he called her his wife. It was supposed to be pretend, but in that moment, it had not felt like a performance. By the next morning, the penthouse no longer felt like a stranger's home. The walls were still cold, the hallways too long, but she carried herself differently. Claire appeared with another schedule, but even she gave Mia a nod of approval. "You handled yourself well," she said curtly, though her eyes softened for the first time. In the evening, Ethan was unusually quiet. He sat alone on the rooftop terrace, a glass of whiskey untouched at his side. Mia found him there, the skyline blazing behind him in gold and orange as the sun set. For a moment she thought to leave him be, but something about his stillness pulled her closer. "You are not drinking," she said gently. He glanced at the glass, then at her. "It is not about the drink." Silence stretched between them. Mia leaned against the railing, the wind tugging at her hair. "Last night, you defended me. You did not have to." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He disrespected you. And if they disrespect you, they disrespect me." "Oh, that sounded more like business than care," Mia replied quietly. Ethan exhaled, the weight of something unspoken pressing on his shoulders. He turned his eyes back to the skyline. "My mother used to sit up here, every night. She said the city looked smaller from above, less overwhelming. When she died, I stopped coming here. Last night reminded me, she would have liked you." The words caught Mia off guard. His voice carried no coldness, no calculation. For the first time, he was not the CEO, not the man who spoke in contracts and commands. He was just a son, still mourning. Mia's throat tightened. She wanted to reach for his hand but hesitated. Instead, she said softly, "Your mother must have been a strong woman." "She was," Ethan said, his eyes glimmering with something raw. "Stronger than I will ever be." The vulnerability in his tone wrapped around Mia like a secret. She had expected arrogance, but not this. She had expected control, but not confession. For a moment she forgot about the signed papers, the walls of wealth that separated them. She only saw a man trying desperately not to break. Later that week, Ethan drove her to a private gallery. It was closed to the public that night, the halls echoing with their footsteps. Paintings stretched across the walls, bold and breathtaking. Mia wandered slowly, her fingers itching for the sketchbook she had left in her room. "You like art," Ethan observed, watching her linger before a canvas splashed with color. Mia nodded, her voice soft. "It used to be everything. Then life got in the way." He studied her profile, the light catching her expression as if she were part of the painting itself. "Do you still draw?" "A little," she admitted, "mostly in secret. It feels foolish, chasing dreams when there are bills to pay." "It is not foolish," Ethan said firmly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "It is who you are." The conviction startled her. She turned, meeting his eyes, and for once they were not cold steel but something warmer. something she could almost trust. That night, back in the penthouse, Mia sat on her bed with the sketchbook open on her lap. For the first time in years, she began a new drawing. Her pencil moved with trembling lines, but they were alive. She realized Ethan's words had planted a seed she thought had long since died. And as the city lights glowed outside her window, she wondered if the contract she had signed was truly the trap she feared, or the doorway to something she had never dared to believe in again. The weeks that followed, the gala blurred into a strange rhythm. By day, Mia accompanied Ethan to events that sparkled with wealth and power. By night, she returned to the quiet of the penthouse, where she sketched until her eyes grew heavy. Somewhere in between, the line between contract and connection began to blur. One night, after a particularly tense board dinner, Mia found Ethan in his study. Papers littered the desk, numbers and charts glowing on his laptop. His tie hung loose, and his shoulders sagged under invisible weight. "You look exhausted," Mia said softly from the doorway. He looked up, his eyes shadowed. "The board is circling. They want proof I am stable, that I am not reckless. That is why this marriage exists. But sometimes, I wonder if I am fooling anyone at all." She stepped closer, her voice gentle. "You fooled me, at least for a while. But I do not think you are reckless. I think you are afraid." His gaze sharpened. "Afraid?" "Yes," Mia said firmly. "Afraid of losing everything you built. Afraid of being alone." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned back, exhaling slowly. "When my mother died, I realized how fragile it all was. She was the reason I worked so hard. Without her, I buried myself in numbers, deals, contracts. I thought control was the only way to survive." Mia's chest tightened. She recognized that fear because she carried her own. She reached across the desk, laying her hand lightly over his. To her surprise, he did not pull away. Instead, his fingers turned, brushing against hers as if testing the reality of her presence. The silence between them deepened, not awkward but heavy with something unspoken. Then Ethan whispered, "You make it harder to keep the rules." Her pulse raced, but she forced a smile. "Good. Some rules are meant to be broken." The next evening, they attended a fundraising gala at a museum. This time, Mia moved with more confidence, her smile softer, her posture graceful. Guests whispered about the change, about the way Ethan's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. But not everyone was charmed. Near the end of the night, a woman in a glittering red dress approached them. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes sharp. "Ethan." It has been a long time. Mia recognized her immediately from whispers she had overheard. Isabella, Ethan's former fiancée, the one who had walked away when his life grew too complicated. Isabella's smile turned toward Mia, thin and cutting. "And this must be your wife." Mia forced a polite nod. "Yes, I am Mia." "Ah, interesting," Isabella said, her gaze sweeping over Mia like she was a curiosity. "You are not what I expected. But perhaps stability is all you need now, Ethan." The words were honeyed with venom. Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Mia found her voice. "Sometimes what we need is not what others expect. Sometimes it is something real." Isabella's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more. She walked away, her perfume lingering like smoke. Ethan turned to Mia, his expression unreadable, but his voice was low, steady. "You handled that well." Back at the penthouse, the night was quiet, except for the city hum outside the windows. Ethan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. For once, he did not sit across the room but beside her on the sofa. "You are stronger than I imagined," he admitted. Mia smiled faintly. "I had to be. Life did not give me another choice." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the contract, the rules, the facade, none of it mattered. There was only the steady beat of hearts drawing closer. And as the night deepened, Mia realized something terrifying. She was no longer pretending. She was falling. The morning after Isabella's appearance, headlines spread like wildfire. Tabloids splashed photos of Ethan and Mia across glossy pages, each with cruel speculation. "Who is the waitress who trapped Chicago's youngest CEO?" Another article claimed, "Sources reveal their marriage is nothing but a business deal." Mia sat at the kitchen island, clutching a mug of untouched coffee, her stomach twisted with every word. Claire placed a stack of newspapers in front of Ethan, her face grim. It is everywhere. Investors are calling. The board demands an emergency meeting. Ethan's jaw tightened as he scanned the articles. This is Isabella's doing. She fed them just enough to stir doubt. Mia's heart pounded. They are saying the marriage is fake. What if they find the contract? What if— They will not, Ethan cut in sharply, though the tension in his voice betrayed his own fear. But the damage is done. They will question everything. That afternoon, the boardroom buzzed with icy stares and pointed questions. Ethan stood tall at the head of the long oak table, his hand resting firmly on the back of Mia's chair. "Mr. Gray," one of the older members said, his voice heavy with suspicion, "these rumors about your so-called marriage, are they true?" Ethan's eyes swept across the room. "You question my personal life instead of my results? Carter Industries has grown 10% this quarter. We have secured 3 new contracts. Does that sound like instability?" "But the press," another interrupted. "The press thrives on lies," Ethan snapped, then steadied his tone. "My wife is not a liability. She is my partner, and I will not tolerate her being disrespected." Mia's cheeks burned as all eyes turned to her. She wanted to disappear, yet Ethan's hand remained on her shoulder, grounding her. She saw the flicker of defiance in his expression, a man daring them to challenge him. Still, when the meeting adjourned, the whispers followed. Outside the boardroom, Ethan's mask of confidence cracked. He slammed his fist against the wall, his breath ragged. "They want to destroy me," he muttered. "And they will use you to do it." Mia stepped closer, her voice trembling but firm. "Then let them try. I will not run, Ethan. You defended me, and I will stand beside you." He looked at her, truly looked, as if seeing her for the first time. For a heartbeat, the storm inside him quieted. But both of them knew the battle was far from over. Because once a lie begins to unravel, the truth has no choice but to come to light. 2 days later, the storm finally broke. A leaked document appeared online, blurry photographs of a contract, stamped with Ethan's signature and Mia's name. The words were clear enough. 6 months, appearances, termination. Within hours, the scandal dominated every headline. Marriage contract exposed. CEO. Ethan Gray's wife was paid to play a role. Reporters swarmed the front of Gray Tower, their cameras flashing like lightning every time the penthouse doors opened. Mia sat on the sofa, her face pale. The copy of the contract Ethan had once locked away was now public. She could barely breathe. "It is over, Ethan. They know everything." Ethan paced the length of the room, his fury like a storm barely contained. "Someone inside the company leaked this. Isabella wanted to humiliate me, but this is worse. They will strip me of my position." "And me?" Mia whispered. "I am the liar in their eyes, the gold digger who signed away her dignity." "What?" The words cracked her voice, and she turned away so he would not see the tears spilling down her cheeks. But Ethan did see. For the first time, the walls around him crumbled. He crossed the room, gently taking her hand. "This started as a contract," he admitted, his voice low and unsteady. "But it became more. You became more. And if I lose everything, I will not let them take you from me too." Mia's breath caught. The man who once spoke only in terms of business now sounded raw, almost desperate. "Why say this now?" she asked, trembling. "Because I am done hiding," Ethan said fiercely. "Done pretending this is only about survival. You are the only real thing in my life." The next morning, the board convened again, tension thick in the air. Cameras lined the hallway, waiting for a statement. Ethan entered hand in hand with Mia. Gasps echoed through the room as he dropped a folder of contracts onto the table. "Yes, this marriage began as an agreement," he said clearly, his voice echoing in the chamber. "But no paper dictates how I feel today. I will not allow my company, or anyone here, to treat my wife as a transaction. If you believe that disqualifies me as your leader, then take my title, but you will not take my truth." The room fell silent. Some faces hardened, others softened. Mia's heart raced as Ethan's words settled like a challenge no one expected. For the first time since the beginning, she felt the chains of the contract break not through signatures, but through choice. Ethan had chosen her, not the board, not the company, not the power. And that choice changed everything. Weeks passed, and the chaos that once threatened to consume them began to fade. The tabloids moved on to fresher scandals, and the board, after much arguing, allowed Ethan to remain in his position. Investors who doubted him at first were silenced by his bold transparency and his refusal to bow to fear. But for Ethan and Mia, what mattered most was not the company's survival. It was the quiet truth they now shared. One evening, Ethan led Mia to a small gallery tucked away in the heart of the city. She looked around in wonder. The walls were lined with sketches, paintings, and charcoal portraits. Her breath caught as she recognized each one. They were hers. Pages from the sketchbook she thought no one had noticed, framed and displayed under soft lights. Tears welled in her eyes. "How did you?" Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You thought your art did not matter, but it does. It matters to me. This is my apology for the lies, and my promise that from now on, nothing between us will be hidden." Mia covered her mouth with trembling hands, her heart pounding. The man who once reduced their bond to signatures and rules now stood before her, bearing everything without fear. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Kneeling before her, Ethan opened it to reveal a ring that sparkled under the gallery lights. But more than the diamonds, it was the raw sincerity in his eyes that stole her breath. "I do not want a contract anymore," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I want a life. Mia Torres, will you marry me truly this time? No papers, no conditions, just us?" Her tears spilled freely as she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the gallery erupted in applause from the small circle of friends and supporters he had invited. Claire stood in the back, smiling faintly. Her usually sharp demeanor softened. The ceremony came weeks later, held not in a grand ballroom but in the very gallery Ethan had created for her. Surrounded by her art, their vows echoed like promises etched into the walls themselves. Mia wore a simple gown, Ethan a dark suit, but nothing about the moment felt small. As they exchanged rings, Ethan whispered, "The best mistake I ever made was meeting you." And with that, their story, once a lie written in ink, became a love written in truth. The billionaire CEO and the waitress no longer lived under the shadow of a contract. They stood as equals, bound not by rules, but by the choice to love each other, no matter what storms came their way.